This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
As Ed said, we're in different locations, so we appreciate your tolerance as far as moving locations. Welcome to the Tampa Bay Estuary Program Policy Board meeting for Friday, February 18th. Let's do roll call.
Commissioner Charlie Justice, Knox County.
Present.
Commissioner Stacey White, or May Nixon, alternate. Stacey White. Kevin Van Austin, Manatee County.
Present.
Colleen Weaver, or Commissioner
Present.
Councilmember Edmonds Spring.
Present.
Councilmember Steve Felder, or Ron Walton.
Present.
Councilmember Kathleen Beckman.
Present.
Mr. Tom McGill, USCPA.
Present.
Director Kelly Boatwright, EP.
Present.
Dr. William Hogarth, Switzerland.
Present.
We do have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Wonderful, thank you very much. It seems like it's a new year and new councils got elected last fall, and I missed the last meeting, so a lot of shuffling of faces around, but wonderful to see you all this morning. Before we get to our agenda, item number one, we do have a special proclamation. I'll turn it over to Mr. Sherwood.
Yeah, has been the status quo the past couple of years. There's been a lot of retirements of longstanding partners of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and this meeting is more of the same. Today we're here to honor Mr. Rob Brown with Manatee County. Rob has been a longstanding member of the Technical Advisory Committee of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. He was the Tampa Bay Management Consortium's government co-chair for quite some time. He was instrumental in the foundation of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program in the early 1990s. Has done numerous research efforts in forwarding our understanding of the recovery of Tampa Bay. I think the biggest thing that I had a great pleasure of working with Rob on is many of the water quality issues and the monitoring programs that have been established by each of the partners within the watersheds. He's been instrumental in leading some of the regional ambient monitoring programs to get all the laboratories on the same page in terms of having shared round robin water exchanges to ensure that the water quality parameters that we're monitoring collectively in the region are all comparable. That was definitely a benefit to our region when we experienced Piney Point last year, and all the partners came together to collectively monitor the conditions in the bay over that summer period of last year. So all that data that was collected by the various agencies are comparable because of those efforts through the regional ambient monitoring program. So today we're honoring Rob as a champion of Tampa Bay. We have a proclamation that will show up on the screen. We also have a gift that we would like to provide to him, and I would welcome any other board comments on Rob's contributions to the program. Rob, if you don't mind. I'll read off the whereases. Whereas Rob Brown was instrumental in protecting and restoring Tampa Bay for more than 3 decades. I think it's 35 years, right? 30. Whereas Rob's leadership and dedication to data quality has resulted in 96 quarterly Southwest Florida Regional Ambient Monitoring Program round robin sample collections and interlaboratory data comparison. Whereas Rob's involvement in more than 40 research projects and authorship of more than 45 publications has aided in the region's scientific advancements. Whereas Rob was an integral member of the program's Technical Advisory Committee and served as the local government co-chair of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. Whereas Rob had the ability to bring together environmental stewards for the betterment of the Bay and advance the efforts of not only our program, but the Southwest Florida National Estuary Programs represented by Sarasota Bay and also Coastal and Heartland Estuary Programs down in Charlotte Harbor. And Rob supported regional resilience to climate change through his involvement in the Climate Science Advisory Panel and Regional Resilience Coalition Management and Planning Committee. And Rob's commitment to protecting Tampa Bay has left an impression on all that knew him, especially for his very blunt and straightforward comments many times. So we very much appreciated Rob in our partnership, and like I said, he's been instrumental to our foundation and growth that organization. So, Rob, we're happy to proclaim you as a champion at the end of the day and provide you.
Great, thank you very much.
Say a few words.
Just a few words. This has been a great run. I believe I'm one of the old guard that established the program in the early 90s. And it's a wonderful collaboration, the Estuary programs. They mean so much to our region. I know policy board members, you guys kind of rotate through routinely, but you're an integral part of success of the programs, very much so. Your predecessors, back in the 70s and 80s, established the Grizzly Pig Act, which required all of our wastewater to be upgraded. So that was a kickstart for the program and the revitalization of Tampa Bay. Again, if you were around in the 70s like I was, it was in pretty bad shape. Then in the 90s, when the program came around, we had some lofty goals. And we said, let's just reach for the stars, go for it. So we established some water quality criteria, seagrass targets, benthic targets for the organisms in the sediment, and said, let's just go for it. And, you know, I never believed we would have reached our seagrass goals in 2015. I had no idea that we would ever make it within my career, and we've done it. But now you've got a new challenge. And I told Ed early on, that even when going through the hiring process, you know, when you set a goal, you reach for it, you go for it, and you see the progress, it's kind of easy to keep going. But once you get there, it's really difficult to maintain. And you guys have some new challenges going forward. We've got climate issues. We've got, you know, unprecedented growth that's putting pressures on our utilities, our wastewater, and our stormwater. So your challenges moving forward is to, you know, keep it going. And like I said, that's the hardest part, is keeping it going. It's not as glamorous as trying to, like I said, reach for the stars and reach for the goals, but it's just as important or more important. So again, I thought you moving forward. Some of us will be around if you need any historical advice. But again, this is a great ride and a wonderful accomplishment, I think, for my career. So I appreciate everyone. Thanks.
Thank you and congratulations, Mr. Brown. We appreciate all your good work.
Thank you.
I think that's when you leave things better when you found them, that's how we're supposed to do it. And you're a shining example. We appreciate your good work.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
maybe just a couple comments. So Rob Brown has been instrumental in Manatee County when it comes to the environment in general, not just with this estuary program, but we're actually in 3 estuary programs with the only county in the country that is. 33 years, he's been making this impact, and he really leaves behind the legacy of knowing that he left Manatee County in better shape than he found it. He was the integral part of making it that way. And his retirement is a tremendous, he's a great asset to us as a county, and it's a tremendous loss. Our average age of our employees is 57 in Manatee County, so I feel like it's like every month we're having these, like, we're losing another tremendous asset, and we're losing all this sort of institutional knowledge. He's another example of that, but he's been wonderful, wonderful asset to Manatee County for all these years. It's a terrible loss. So we wish you all of the happiness in the world during your retirement, sir.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, very good. Let's move on to our agenda. Item number 1 Approval of changes to agenda, Mr. Sherwood.
2 recommended changes. At your places, there's an updated agenda item 7 with a formal recommendation for a contractor for the interim CCMP update. Secondly, we're asking the board to move agenda item 9 right after that agenda item 7 to follow on the discussion of program boundary expansion.
Are there questions, discussion, or motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second. We have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, so it passes unanimously. Item number 2, approval of minutes from the November 19th policy board meeting. Are there questions, discussion, or motion to approve?
I make motion to approve. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, so it passes unanimously. Item number 3, general citizens comments. Do we have any public comment? All right. Moving on to our action items. Item number 4, acceptance of the annual program-wide audit report. Mr. Sherwood.
Yeah, Mrs. Lauren Stroke from Terry Becker will provide an overview of our annual audit. This is customarily what we provide at the February board meeting for our prior fiscal year, which ended September 30th of 2021. Lauren, can you hear us okay? And are you able to see the presentation?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you today on the audit results related to the September 30th, 2021 audit, which we completed on February 2nd of this year. So this presentation really goes into the timing, the nature, and the results of the audit. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. When we complete the audit of the Estuary program, we actually follow a variety of different standards, and we actually do issue 3 separate opinions. The first is an opinion on the financial statements, and that opinion is just to provide assurance that the financial statements are free from any sort of material misstatement or error or omission. We did issue an unmodified opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that we can provide as your auditor. It used to be called an unqualified opinion. It's a clean opinion and the only type of opinion that you would want. You can find this on page 1 of the financial statements. On page 30 of the financial statements is where you can find our Yellow Book report, or also known as the Government Auditing Standards Report. And this is required by the state of Florida for the Estuary program. We did have one comment, and what this means is the Yellow Book report covers internal controls. It's not that we opine on internal controls, but it causes us to look at internal controls as it relates to financial reporting. If we become aware of any sort of significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, we comment on them and communicate them to you. We do have one comment. It is a material weakness, and we'll go over that in just a second. The third report you can find on page 32 of the financial statements, and that covers your single audit. So that is the work that we did over that federal single audit program. And what we do there is look at compliance and internal control over compliance. This is a no comment or clean report, and it's the best kind of report that you can get. On the other deliverables, we do issue a management letter that's required by the state of Florida. This is a no comment or no change modification, which is the best and highest level of assurance that we can provide as it relates to that. We also are required by the state of Florida to look at your compliance with investment policies through Florida state statute, and you have a clean opinion there as well. On the internal control side of things, you can see the finding itself on page, the finding itself is on page 32, and the corrective action is on page 38. What the finding had to do with was amounts of revenue that were recorded during the year but weren't actually earned during the year. So both the revenue and the net position was reduced by those amounts to properly state revenue. And that was in the amount of $56,000. That was our only audit adjusting entry was related to that, and we had no past audit adjusting entries. So all the entries that we proposed were made by management. If we can flip to the next slide. I did want to cover some of the internal controls that we looked at when we completed the audit. We look at all the significant transaction cycles, so financial reporting and close, the processing of cash receipts, cash disbursements, and then the processing of payroll. As far as single audit, I already covered that opinion, but we did the audit over the National Estuary Program. And again, that was a clean or no comment opinion. As far as journal entries are concerned, we did get the entire GL detail and dump it into an active data analysis tool. And this allows us to pull journal entries for testing based on risky transactions as opposed to just kind of pulling them out of the hat. We found that all of the journal entries that we've selected were proper and were properly approved. We also look at IT controls as it relates to financial reporting, and those are some of the items that we look at. We did not find anything that we need to bring to your attention today. We can flip to the next slide. These are some of the significant audit areas, so it's not to say this is all we look at during the audit, but this was what we focused the majority of our time on, that being assets and revenue and the liabilities and expenditures, and then the bucket of other areas, which includes fund balance and net position, which is appropriate, which is important, that we're recognizing any sort of restriction that we should. So we look at that, we look at capital assets, prepaids, any sort of related party transactions. We search minutes, board meeting minutes and discussions with management for any sort of subsequent events or commitments that need to be disclosed. We spend a lot of time looking at estimates. So the financial statements are kind of, they inherently have a lot of management judgment and estimate within them. So we spend a lot of time looking at that and making sure that the estimates make sense in line with the financial statements as a whole. We also will look at any sort of legal expenses to ensure that there aren't any commitments that need to be disclosed. And if we can flip to the next slide. In summary, you have a clean opinion over your financial statement and your single audit report. We did test journal entries and we found nothing of note that we need to disclose to you. As far as internal controls are concerned, there was the one material weakness that was identified relating to the improper recording of revenue. And I did want to mention that we had full cooperation with management. They are wonderful to work with. Everything that we asked for, they got to us timely. Every time when we had a question, they made sure we got an answer, and we really do appreciate that. On this last slide, this is my contact information. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have now, but I work for you throughout the year. So if anything ever comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, I'll take any questions you might have.
Questions for our auditor? All right. Sure.
Yeah, in terms of the one material weakness that was found, like Laura mentioned, this is things that we propose as corrective actions to rectify over the course of the next fiscal year. Certainly working with our bookkeeper a lot closer on a quarterly basis to rectify the reports that we're receiving from the accountant with these financial statements, these audited financial statements. So just need to have a cleaner close next year, but certainly our aim is always to have a clean audit when we come to the board. So just want to recognize that and give that assurance to the board.
All right, if no questions or further discussion, or is there a motion to accept?
Move approval. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. Item number 5, acceptance of quarterly financial report. Mr. Sherwood.
On page 11 of the packets, and I'll bring it up on the screen as well, is our report for the first quarter of fiscal year 2022. Overall, we're pretty much on track in terms of revenue and expenses, but there are a couple of things I would like to highlight. We're still expecting some membership dues from a couple of entities to round out the partner revenues for this fiscal year. We're also expecting in-kind revenue documentation from Pinellas County over the next quarter. So at the next meeting, we expect to be pretty much ahead of the game in terms of revenue collection for the upcoming for this fiscal year. On the expenses side, there's a couple of footnotes. The insurance footnote number 2 is just a recognition that we prepaid the rest of our balance for our current policy, which will be set to renew in the summer. So we typically pay the first quarter's bill of the upcoming fiscal year and in the previous fiscal year's budget. So we'll expect that bill to kind of round out to 100% later this summer. But I just wanted to note that we prepaid it. That's why you see a note of about 75% of what we budgeted for insurance. The other two footnotes of printing and the other expenses relate to some of our sponsored conferences and the materials for those sponsored conferences. So we were over budget in terms of what those items were initially developed in the initial budget for fiscal year 2022. Those are primarily contractual services that will come back to the board at the May meeting to make a mid-year budget amendment and move some of those resources that we allocated on the contractual services specifically towards those items. Again, overall, our expenses are at about the 23.6% level, right where we should be for the first quarter of fiscal year 2022. And I'll be happy to answer any other questions on the quarterly financials that you might have.
Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to make sure on the contributions and donations and the membership dues are, can we be assured that my municipality has paid its dues in full? I mean, you share that with us?
Did you bring your credit card today?
Yes, you guys are good.
We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Is there a motion to accept?
Make a motion to accept the financial
Second.
report.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. Item number 6, approval of operating procedural manual update.
On page 12 of the packet is a link to our operations procedure manual. There are many references to our now retired program administrator, Ron Hosler, who retired last November. So we had to make several corrections within the operating procedures manual to reflect new staffing. Basically, we replaced a lot of those references to our current administrative staff, which includes me, Maya Burke as assistant director, and Jessica Lewis as program support specialist to serve as the administrative arm of our program. There are a couple other minor definition updates related to budget items that we list under expenses in the quarterly reports, just to reflect those definition updates in our operating procedures manual. But overall, just an update to bring that in line with our current staffing conditions. I'll be happy to bring up those changes on the screen if you had any discussion on those changes in the manual itself, or any other questions you might have on what has been outlined in that agenda item.
Are there questions or discussion? If none, is there a motion to approve? So moved. We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. Item number 7, comprehensive conservation management plan, interim update contractor selection. Ms. Bird.
So EPA requires us to revisit our major guiding document, our CCMP, every 5 years. Believe it or not, we're coming up on year 5 of the CCMP that was overhauled back in 2017. So we issued this request for proposals with several tasks identified for support. One would be to update the actions and activities in the CCMP to reflect all of the progress that we've made since 2017 when that new plan was updated. To conduct public engagement and develop new action plans or activities related to environmental justice, consistent with the executive orders and EPA guidance on that matter. To update our climate change action plan, not just to identify vulnerabilities, but also those adaptation activities that we could implement to reduce the likelihood or the consequences of climate change affecting the goals that we've established as a program. And also to conduct stakeholder engagement and evaluate a potential study area boundary expansion. Think about things like how we can improve partner implementation reporting on progress made towards the CCMP actions, and then provide graphic design services. So we're hoping to accomplish this work as a fairly routine sort of update to that CCMP, and we're hoping to accomplish this work in about 8 months. We received 3 proposals in response to our request, and we convened a review committee comprised of folks like Diego Vieira of Plan Hillsborough, Jessica Stempian from Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and Angela Collins with Manatee County Sea Grant, and myself. So we reviewed reviewed those 3 proposals, and we were unanimous in our consideration of those proposals, recommending that, well, the highest ranked proposal was Schaefer Consulting. However, of those tasks, the committee did suggest that, in particular, the expertise that Schaefer Consulting proposed to accomplish task 2 with respect to developing stakeholder engagement and outreach to develop an environmental justice actions or action plans was needed a little additional support. And in particular, the committee expressed the importance of not just naming community leaders that could help them accomplish that work, but also compensating them for that expertise that they would provide in the process. And so they recommended that the program consider negotiating on that particular task. So these findings were all shared with Ed, the executive director, in order to develop the staff recommendation that you see before you on this updated agenda item. And that staff recommendation is to authorize the executive director to negotiate a scope and enter into a contract with Schaefer Consulting for an amount not to exceed $79,950. And then recommend that you all allow the executive director to amend the scope and budget for up to $25,000 if additional funds become available, which is our standard policy. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Question?
Yes, I have. So the additional $25,000 would be for the community leaders and.
The additional $25,000 is only if additional funds become available and if we identify that they're needed. Currently, we're not proposing adding that money to a contract that we would negotiate with Schaefer Consulting. That's just something that we have in our procedures so that we don't have to come back to the board for every time there might be a change order.
Our attempt would to negotiate with them up to that 79,950 level for all the services outlined in the request for proposal.
All right, thank you.
There's no questions or discussion, or is there a motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, show it back unanimously. And if, for those that are new or watching or interested, all of us have a full briefing on the agenda items before the meeting and have an opportunity to go through with staff and ask questions. So if it appears that we're moving through relatively quickly, we are, but that's with all the full background. And I don't like to hang out any longer than I need to, but we can hang out all day if you have questions we want to discuss. So it's at the pleasure of the board. With that, we are on to item number 9.
Just kind of expand on the discussion of the contractor. One of the components that Maya just mentioned was the potential for a program area expansion. This has come out during several iterations of our CCMP update and also during the strategic plan. So what we're hoping to elicit at this meeting is a discussion. We're not looking for any actions from the board at this time, but this will help us guide the activities of that contractor. And in doing so, we're going to ask you to participate in a online menti.com survey just to gauge the overall board's initial feeling for moving forward on these expenses. So if you have a cell phone available, you can scan the QR code or go directly to menti.com and enter that code, and that will allow you to do some online polling. And we'll give it just a second for everyone to get there.
Just loading.
Yeah.
Okay, well, until I log in.
Did you? Here we go.
Yeah. So I have to get away from construction for real. Everybody? All right, so discussion isn't really coming out of nowhere. This is something that our policy board and management board have brought up in conversations for a number of times over a number of years. And so it really did come up during our strategic plan development process, this idea of some of the management conference members wishing for the program to work in areas outside the existing watershed study area that we currently work in. Specifically, Pasco County is very interested in portions of their county that are not currently included in the study area boundary. The city of Clearwater has similar thoughts and concerns, and so does Pinellas County. So this discussion's been ongoing, and part of that discussion has been what we were able to come to consensus on to incorporate in the strategic plan was this idea that we need to recognize that changing the partnership dynamic of those who sit at this table and the geographic scale of the program is possible, but it has to be balanced with the ability of the program to deliver our work within resource limits. So I think we all agree on that as the sort of guiding foundation for what a potential boundary expansion might look like. But how do we get to a place where we're making decisions and getting direct guidance to answer this question once and for all? And so this today is really, like Ed mentioned, it's really a discussion, it's a conversation. You're not making a decision today. This is information that staff will use to develop that path forward. I'll be using this information as I negotiate a scope with our CCMP contractor so that I figure out what the right parts of that task to evaluate study area boundary expansion might look like, and really start to give us some parameters and give everyone a taste of where the folks in the room are standing on these issues. So I don't want anybody to feel like pressured into a decision. This is not an action item. So part of the reason that we're bringing this conversation up again, we know you brought it up during the strategic planning session, but now that we're embarking upon a CCMP update, it's another opportunity that makes sense administratively for us to begin to look at this question. And some of that has to do with the fact that EPA has certain guidance for how we develop and how a CCMP is approved. So not only do we have to share the CCMP with the community and get their buy-in, with our management conference, with you all as our policy board and get your buy-in, but we also have to get EPA's buy-in as well. And they have certain guidance that distinguishes between a minor update, things like reflecting minor changes in terms of the progress that we've made on an action that's already included in the plan, and a major revision, which includes things like adding area to your geographic study area boundary, and doing that foundational work that really characterizes that part of the watershed, the challenges in that watershed, and how those challenges will be addressed once it's incorporated into a CCMP. So that's part of why this conversation is going now. Like I said, to help me develop that and negotiate that scope of work so that I can be responsive to the will of this. So for those of you who aren't familiar, this is our existing study area. It loosely follows the areas that drain to Tampa Bay. It's about 2,600 miles, inclusive of the bay itself. And there is around 3 million people that are living in this area. You can see it makes up a significant portion of Hillsborough County, portions of Pasco County, portions even all the way to Polk County, Manatee County, Pinellas County. So it takes a little bit, but not all of any of your counties. So in having these conversations, we've heard specific interest from sort of 3 separate distinct areas that I want to call your attention to just to familiarize yourself with. These are conceptual in nature, just to give you a framework for how we might discuss these. None of these are formal staff recommendations, or none of this is how it ought to be. This is just sort of to give us a shared language of how to talk about these things. So you'll see this area in the purple is Clearwater Harbor, St. Joseph Sound, the portion of Pinellas County that drains to Clearwater Harbor, St. Joseph Sound. The area in red is the Antelope River watershed, so it spans both the northern portions of Pinellas County as well as portions of Pasco County. And then the orange area is the Pasco Gulf Coast, so it includes parts of the Chiscoty watershed all the way up to Double Hammock Creek. This area, in comparison to what our current boundary area is around a little bit more than 250 extra square miles added to that. So it's relatively small in proportion to the rest of the watershed. So we took these conceptual areas and we began to gather feedback from some of our subcommittees that are meant to sort of to provide feedback up the chain to you all. When we shared this conversation with our technical advisory committee, they had three main points that they wanted to convey. The first is that they felt that the seagrass resources in Clearwater Harbor, St. Joseph's Sound, and maybe even all the way up to Anclote Key were somewhat comparable to the sorts of seagrass resources we have in the Tampa Bay watershed that as it exists currently. They also noted that much of this foundational work has already been completed in a CCFP for Clearwater Harbor and St. Joseph Sound. However, when it got to those areas north of Anclote Key, they had several concerns that they wanted to share with you. Namely, this was about different monitoring constraints for both water quality and habitats along the Pasco Gulf Coast, north of the Anclote River. So the shelf is very broad in that part of the Gulf of Mexico, and seagrasses can grow up to 20 miles offshore. There was concern about who would be able to conduct the annual monitoring needed on those seagrass resources that extend for such a broad area. They also expressed concerns about how frequently that area was mapped from aerial surveys conducted by the Southwest Florida Water Management District. Additionally, they were not aware of ongoing ambient water quality monitoring in that portion of the Gulf of Mexico, and were unsure what information could be used to establish baselines and sort of integrate in with the ongoing characterization of water resources within the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. So when this conversation was shared with the Community Advisory Committee, they also had really excellent feedback for you all to consider. They reflected on the idea that they felt like Boca-Ciega Bay and Clearwater Harbor are connected, so that made sense to them. They thought that expanding the boundary was appropriately inclusive and reflects the fact that we really are one regional community, and that this would provide clarity for residents and visitors alike who don't necessarily know when they cross over from the Gulf side to the Bay side. The Community Advisory Committee is very protective of their Bay mini grants program. They are very invested in reviewing those, and they're proud of the work that they do with the community, supporting community efforts to protect the Bay. And they expressed some concern that there was a risk of beginning to direct Bay mini grants towards the Gulf and away from Tampa Bay, that it would be a sort of zero-sum game, and that the investment in Tampa Bay might suffer. They also, particularly some of our long-serving Community Advisory Committee members, were very concerned about staff being stretched too thin and not wanting to exacerbate that. And they wanted reassurance that if the geographic boundary was to be expanded, that it would come along with additional financial support for that expanded geography. So really thoughtful feedback from both of our committees for you all to think about. So then we had this conversation at the management board meeting, and I'm trying to synthesize and distill everything that they provided as feedback as well. And they were very engaged in this topic. They, in fact, didn't really need this sort of structured engagement to walk through. They provided their feedback quite freely. But I think some of the main points that I would like to express to you on their behalf is that they noted that expansion might have unintended consequences for those adopted management strategies, like the Nitrogen Management Consortium's Reasonable Assurance Plan, which has regulatory implications for many of our permit holders, both public and private alike. In fact, one quote from a management board member was, "Look, we're struggling to meet the nitrogen goals now in Old Tampa Bay, and new efforts in new areas could distract us from those current challenges." There was also a lot of discussion around the fact that expansion will necessitate the addition of staff, and there are a number of associated logistical challenges that should be considered before embarking too far down this path. So things like how much office space do we have to accommodate additional bodies in the space that we have recently signed a lease for? Then there was considerable discussion about the timing and what would really be necessary for them to feel comfortable making a decision or a recommendation in terms of whether or not we ought to go down this path of expanding the boundary. And there was some frustration, I think, about for how often this conversation has come up and not had resolution. So we're all very interested in finding a clear and structured path to guidance and direction so that we can sort of answer this question once and for all. So to that end, some folks did feel like concerned that they were having to make a decision during that discussion. And I think that the consensus was that it really wouldn't be feasible to add all of that new area in during this 8-month period where we're updating our CCMP in 2022. However, there was some willingness to consider the idea for 2027. So they kind of said, we're open to it if we can find this path for a decision and work towards it over the next five-year period. But there wasn't really consensus for doing it right now. And then again, a lot of discussion around the fact that what is the goals of expanding the boundary? It's unclear. What would be expected of new partners and what would be expected of TPEP staff? Are the things that have been identified as challenges, things like messaging and how that messaging gets translated on the Gulf side versus the Bay side, are those things that we can do without expanding the boundaries? What would the value really be of adding geographic scope to the Estuary Program study area boundary? And so then to this question of how do we begin to move this down the path of making a decision and providing clear guidance so that this question doesn't continue to hang with us for the next 5, 10, 15 years. So their recommendation was that the TAC should begin to identify the science gaps so that we can inform any future considerations of boundary expansion. So the suggestion was made that under June TAC meeting, we invite representatives from Pinellas County, from Pasco County, from the city of Clearwater and others to share with the technical advisory committee what work they're currently doing on monitoring seagrass resources, what work they're doing monitoring water quality. How would that work integrate in with the management framework that we've set up to assess the rest of the bay? That way we can understand what's already being done and what those gaps are and how feasible it would be to sort of meld the two together. So that was a very long conversation and my best attempt at a short distillation of what was provided. So in general, we have 3 questions that I want to walk through today. I'm really open to this being a conversation. The questions and the Mentimeter is a structured way to get that feedback, but feel free to share your thoughts as we go along. Just so you can see like the actual results from the management board. This is what's up on the screen right now. And I think the real big takeaway here is that there is no clear consensus from the management board on how we ought to answer this question. And that the issue of clear consensus is something that's really important because expanding the geographic scope of the Estuary Program necessitates unanimous support from all of you here at the table. So if we're not unanimous, we cannot amend the interlocal agreement. We cannot do these things that we hope for. So we have to get from a lack of consensus to unanimous support. And we're not there right now, at least from the management board's perspective. Okay, so we're on to the part where you get to provide some interactive feedback. And again, I'll defer to you, how you all would like to provide that feedback. Feel free to rip verbally too, it's fine. But this first question speaks to, should the Tampa Bay Estuary Program pursue additional interlocal agreement funding partners? And this question, the way it was phrased to the management board was something that they weren't particularly, they didn't really like the way that the question was framed originally. And so we restructured it a little bit to try and address what their concerns were. It was originally framed from the perspective of just geographic expansion, and if we expand the geography, should we add additional interlocal agreement funding partners in that way? But they also brought up the fact that we could actually, by joinder, bring in new funding partners regardless of whether we expand the boundary. So we sort of two questions here that we want you to weigh in on. And I am pushing you towards this binary of either supporting or opposing and not giving you a lot of wiggle room in the middle because of this issue of needing to understand where everybody's at, because we have to get to everybody saying yes. So the first question is, should we add partners within the existing Tampa Bay Estuary Program boundary to address those current priority issues? For example, like those in Old Tampa Bay. We know we have some engaged partners up there, for example, Oldsmar or Safety Harbor. There's an opportunity to bring them into the fold and have a seat at this table as well. And then the second part is, should we add partners within an expanded boundary area to effectively serve that larger study area? So I'll give you, yes.
Okay, so you said to effectively serve that larger study area, but I thought the first question was within our boundaries right now.
So the first one is that way,
As it is right now.
as it is right now.
So who would vote no to pursue other funding in keeping our exact same boundaries? I mean, why wouldn't we go out and ask for additional contributing partners?
You'd expand your board.
But well.
You'd have more
Okay.
seats. I mean, that's, just the political reality of,
Okay,
we've never had that issue on this board in all of my time on it, but if you added Safety Harbor and Oldsmar, then,
then they're entitled to a seat on the board. That would be it.
you would think so, depending on the funding level and that kind of thing. And so, again, we've never had that issue as far as like, we only have so much money, we're gonna spend it on Clearwater this year, and, we're not gonna do Manatee. We've never had that. But theoretically, that would be on any kind of political board like these things.
Is that the only drawback we see, is expanding the size of the board with more money that comes in?
But we just updated the interlocal agreement last year, so we'd have to go through that process all over again.
And that's not nothing.
The joinder process expedite that somewhat, but there still has to be unanimous consent of this board to bring on a new member.
Commissioner?
Have any of these other municipalities reached out to us feeling that needs are not being met and not being sufficiently represented by this program?
No, I would not characterize it that way, but some of those entities have reached out and expressed interest in being more actively involved. So.
I mean, I always pause when this is ultimately, it's a policy board, right? But this is ultimately government. And I always pause when we go to grow government. And I haven't been hearing a need. I'm not necessarily hearing that there's specific needs that aren't being met. There's sort of a call to us to expand. We're just looking to expand just for the sake of expanding. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, right? But anytime we go to grow budgets and grow governments and spend more tax dollars, I always pause and say, is this absolutely necessary? Because tax dollars are not voluntarily taken.
I think the adding of the areas has just been an ongoing discussion through staff for years. That's really the impetus of this conversation, not we need more money.
But we are asking for more money.
Well, if we expand it, yes, that means if you have more services, you need more money to pay for those services. So, but that's, yes.
And this isn't a staff recommendation. This is staff trying to be responsive to the requests that have come from management and policy board members prior. So.
And, since we developed that joinder agreement language in the interlocal agreement, the board dynamic has changed a lot. And we were trying to get a read on what the current board's perspective on in terms of bringing more.
Just throwing out their opposite point of view, that's all.
Was there discussion of the, talking about adding the 3 areas? Was there a discussion about the balancing out, like the merit is absolutely 100% there, we're just worried about funding and staff, or was still there a question about the merit of adding this?
There was very much so questions about the merit, and that sort of was reflected in their recommendation that we begin to assemble some of the technical data with respect to the water quality, habitat, and seagrass goals to see if there was even sufficient legwork to make a decision.
Okay. And we did just fund a program in Safety Harbor, even if they're not organizational. All right, so you want us to do the survey?
Yeah.
No further verbal?
This question.
Want me to provide you, register a vote on my computer? You, Dr. Mogo. This is,
Well, is it too late to do it when I leave here today?
yeah, once poll closes.
This is just gonna take the temperature today, right here, right, this, the snapshot.
Yeah, I need the QR code again to close it out.
We'll do it. We'll do it.
Get the code again.
Minty.com.
If I leave right now.
I've been into.com.
And then you still have the number.
I should be able to pull it up.
I don't want to ask you a dumb question, but how do I solve? I push on something and nothing. Okay, so this is the default position.
I thought it was technologically, all right, and then I went to a movie the other day, and they made me use a QR code on my phone before soda. I thought that was the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. But, right, which they usually are the touch screen, but this one made me download this thing and then hit pour on my phone. Instead, you know, Coca-Cola knows who you are. Well, I don't care. And we were the only ones there that day, so it was an empty theater. But can you imagine if there was like a line of people sitting here trying to
Download the app.
That was at Sundial, Mr. Counselor.
Yes.
Yes.
Ed, can you pull the code up from Mindy?
I'm trying not to mess you up at the same time.
I just don't want to close this poll out because it'll mess everybody up.
Wait, is it mintymeter.com?
It's just Mindy.
The code is,
MENTI.
the code is 9648 9235.
So hold on.
I know. 964 925.
Maya, what are those numbers on the little pink circle, blue circle? Are those like percentages? or
It's
what?
giving you the average score of those who responded. So there's more support for adding partners within our existing boundary right now than there is for adding partners out, like in an expanded boundary. Sure.
I know we have some folks representing other members, and I don't know if you all had a chance to chat with your member about this issue before you're voting, but it gives us at least a temperature of the room.
Right, that's, yeah.
Okay, so it starts out with opposed, then I just slide it over to support. Is that the deal?
Yep.
Okay, gotcha.
We have everybody now?
Get it on.
Okay, so our next question is, if expanded, the Tampa Bay Estuary Program study area boundary should include, and then you can basically say how you feel about each of those geographic areas that I showed you earlier. So Clearwater Harbor, St. Joseph Sound, the Anclote River watershed, Pasco Gulf Coast. You can, say yes or no to any one or all as you think appropriate. While we're waiting for the last three votes to come in, is there any discussion about this question, these geographic areas?
Well, I have a little bit of information about our Clearwater Fund in that the St. Joseph Sound does have a CCMP, Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan already. So we've already done some initial studies and are doing assessments. So we're a few steps ahead of some of the farther northern ones. And that the intercoastal flows into that Boca Ciega, so they're hydraulically connected, which adds some weight to that area. And plus, we're certainly willing to pony up more money. And I think Dunedin and Largo would as well as some of those smaller towns along the way in the Narrows.
I know in Pasco, we're behind, to be quite frank with you all. I feel like we're a little behind the ball on some of these areas, but we have commitment. We just added all of this into our strategic plan on our water quality. We added coastal restoration. It's number one, and it's throughout our strategic plan. So we really want to be part, we really want to learn, and we really want to improve. And we have some vital grasses out there. That 20 miles is significant, and it's important to the entire Gulf of Mexico. So us being at the table in that way is really going to improve water quality all the way around. And I've seen our board is voting and moving in that direction. So we really want to be part and learn and improve. So I'm hopeful we get included here eventually. And we just became part of the Nature Coast Aquatic Preserve. And we're still formulating, I'm sitting on that board, and we're still formulating what's happening there and getting getting acclimated with all of that Big Bend area. So I appreciate any support we could get.
And then this last question speaks to timing. You heard the management board's perspective on what was feasible. And so we're posing this to you. How urgently should the San Estuary Program pursue boundary expansion consideration? Should we work to incorporate it over the next 8 months in the 2022 CCMP update or revision? Should we plan for considering a boundary change during the 2027 CCMP update revision, like the next 5 years, so that it aligns with both the next interlocal agreement sunset review and the CCMP revision? Or do you just prefer to keep the boundary the same as it is? And during the management board, there was also a note that the CCMP that Pinellas County has developed for Clearwater Harbor, St. Josephstown has recently secured cooperative funding for an update. And so that update process will take like another 3 or 4 years. So they felt like there was an opportunity to begin to work together over the course of that update and stage things for a 2027 revision. And so that was a comment that Pinellas County offered at the management.
Yeah, the management plan that Councilman Beckman just referenced and Maya was talking about was developed in 2011. So that update would bring that information to more current time frame in terms of the resources and the monitoring programs in place. So there's alignment in terms of that for the 2027 time period for when we plan to update our CCMP and have potential major revision at that time.
Okay, discussion on that? Like you all are closer to.
No sense of urgency today, Maya.
Pasco is really working. I want to say that because we just hired our first coastal engineer, a former Army Corps of Engineers. So we're not there yet. And I voted for that 2027 because I really think we're going to get there, but it's going to take us still some time. So I really like to see that door stay open.
I think what we heard from the management board in particular was that it's much easier to make that case when the municipalities go ahead and make that investment to take the management frameworks that we've applied and set up here in Tampa Bay and make them functional within the areas that they're interested in incorporating so that that legwork is completed So you have an ambient water quality monitoring program that's consistent with the other partners throughout the watershed. You have annual seagrass transect monitoring so that you're consistent with the other partners of the watershed. And you've got this data that we can set the baseline, and there's not an expectation that the estuary program will generate that for you. And I think that that was something that I heard from the management board as being important to them. Okay. Well, this was useful. If you have any other thoughts, there's like a free place that you guys offer them pretty openly, so don't worry about filling this out if you don't want to. Any other discussion?
Again, we appreciate this feedback. I think the next steps are to assess what we receive for both management and policy board. But as Maya mentioned, we're not looking to prolong this discussion for the next 5, 10, 15 years. We'll come back for specific action to move forward on yes or no for updated 2027, considering a geographic boundary expansion. And as Maya mentioned, it would have to be unanimous consent of the boards to make that move for us.
Okay, question.
Yeah.
A second meeting. So a second meeting, that's takes a lot of stuff going on at one time. But do you have a plan of like, what are the most problematic areas that you have to deal with? Where are the most prevalent environmental issues? Where are they ranked somewhere as you found money if somebody dropped you $500,000, you could, for 2 years, you could, better put that money. I've heard more, to be honest with you, in the last 2 weeks, I've got more phone calls about Old Tampa Bay than everything else put together. That we don't do something at Old Tampa Bay, that's all. And that sounds like me as a bigger problem. Maybe a replumbing problem, project. So you have to probably do something better, open it up for residents, this kind of thing. So I'm just trying to figure where is there a priority list where you go to this. These are the most sensitive areas, these are the areas that are critical to address as time comes.
Yeah, certainly within the existing geographic boundary we serve, Old Tampa Bay is our priority, most urgent area of action. Water quality wise, we've missed the mark for the past few years in terms of regulatory thresholds related to chlorophyll, which is the proxy for algal abundance. We've definitely lost significant seagrass resources, and I'm probably stealing a lot of Gary's thunder. He's going to present on an annual update of the state of the bay. But that is where we've been focusing a lot of our attention and resources towards projects and initiatives through both the Technical Advisory Committee, the CC, and the Nitrogen Management Consortium, because of the recognized degradation that has occurred, particularly since seagrass has peaked in 2016 throughout Tampa Bay watershed itself. In terms of the other areas that are being considered in the program expansion, there is an existing management plan for those areas that has been developed by Pinellas County that aligns with a lot of the initiatives that we've developed for the watershed proper. We would probably have to develop similar sorts of things for areas north of the Clearwater Harbor, St. Joseph Sound. We don't have all monitoring information, understanding of the resources in that particular area to the same degree we do in Tampa Bay proper and some of those other minor harbors and sounds along the Gulf. So from the perspective of the program, our priority and what we're going to convey to the boards probably for this year and beyond is refocusing efforts and attention towards Old Tampa Bay, where we have a lot of work to do. And that's where we stand right now. Thanks.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
You did.
Yes, sir.
I apologize. I had to go to a payroll. My legislative aide is going to stay here and I'll get with her. Talk about the things that I missed. Apologize for everything.
Understood. Appreciate that. That's fine. that, we are through the action items. Back to Executive Director Staff Reports, item number 8.
Yeah, at your places, we have a return on investment document specific to each one of your municipalities. This hopefully highlights the work that we do as a program and serves your community specifically. So there are about 5 printed handouts that we hope you would share with your board colleagues and other staffing. If you need more, please let us know. There's also digital copies that are within the board packet links. Also, just want to remind everyone, we are planning for our 7th Bay Area Scientific Information Symposium at the end of this month. Originally, it was postponed from October of last year due to COVID concerns. We're moving forward on this event at the end of this month, and we're holding that in collaboration with the Association of National Estuary Programs. So this is an opportunity to share information about science being conducted both here and in those program areas. So we have a fairly robust 4-day event speaking on those issues, and we welcome your attendance at that symposium. It's going to be held at the downtown Hilton in St. Petersburg. Any questions on that?
Oh, is the date on that again? I'm sorry.
It's February 28th through March 4th. The other thing,
Isn't time over my head.
the other thing to mention, at the last board meeting, I brought up the concept of moving our banking relationship to Climate First Bank. This bank is a new startup in St. Pete that is seeking certified B corporation status, and a lot of the work and funding initiatives that they're supporting align with the vulnerability assessments that we've developed through the CCMP prior updates and that adaptation action plan that we'll develop in this new interim update related to climate change. Not only was the banking switch contemplated for those sort of alignment with CCMP goals, but the comparisons that were provided by the bank to us in terms of our existing account portfolios, we'd actually earn a little bit more interest income from that bank. So both those moves seem to align, like again, with initiatives that we're trying to do in terms of having robust finances to support all the program areas, as well as, like I mentioned, the ethos of that bank aligning with our overall management plan. There was a question at the last board meeting in relation to liquidity of any funds that we deposit into those accounts. There's a series of questions I asked the bank with regards to those board concerns. And from my standpoint, based on our overall account portfolio and holdings with the bank, they did not express any need to place holds on large check deposits or transfers between our accounts, just based on the overall fund portfolio that we currently maintain. The second concern from us to make this formal recommendation to the board was that that bank needs to be certified by the state of Florida as a qualified public depository. As of the development of this packet and sending it out to the board members, they did not have that status, but I actually received notice last week from the bank that they received that certification from the state. So without any other reservations or concerns that you might express today, I will likely come back to this board in May and propose that banking change for everything that I just outlined. And I'll pause there if there are any new concerns in terms of making that banking switch. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have on the bank in particular. Seeing none? All right. Just a quick highlight at the end there of my staff reports related to the legislative priorities that we developed at November's board meeting. There are a U.S. congressional bill, House resolution moving forward out of committee to designate the Little Manitou River as a wild and scenic river to that federal designation. That's good news. I think the House still needs to formally vote on that resolution for it to become law. But that would allow a study to take place for further consideration of the Little Manitou River for that federal designation, which we feel is good news, just to recognize the beauty of that region and also potentially provide some resources in the future for a lot of the restoration activities that we've outlined in a management plan that we developed in partnership with the Flood Management District for some of the restoration needs along the river corridor. The other thing, just to point out, and this was a broad discussion over several meetings in 2021 of the policy board and management boards. There's Florida legislation, Senate Bill 608 and House Bill 303 related to sanitary sewer lateral inspection programs. And what those bills, as I currently wrote, attempt to do is remove any barriers of municipalities conducting work on private homeowners' properties when failing private lateral systems are suspected or there are hotspot areas and service areas that you all represent in your municipalities. Thought it was pretty appropriate walking into the room. There's actually a sign over there by the city, kind of speaking to the lateral line program that the city of St. Petersburg has developed, and we certainly have been supporting those initiatives by the municipalities through our Pipe Up social marketing campaign, and would be happy to share those resources with municipalities and expand upon that program in the future with additional funding of our new work plan. Lastly, just to mention, there are a host of other state legislative bills that are being tracked primarily in partnership with the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. So there's a link also in the executive director reports if you're interested on bills that have a potential environmental impact for the state as well as our region. Before we move on from executive director staff reports, also allow Sheil to give an update on an award that we also received and some Give a Day opportunities if you're interested in volunteering on the weekends.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. So up on the screen, we have all of our upcoming Give a Days. For those of you who are new to the board, Give a Days are essentially half-day volunteer work days that we hold throughout the watershed. So we try to hold at least one or two in each municipality each year. I try to avoid holding them during the summer, but we do have a couple big events in the summer. So this likely represents all of the remaining volunteer events until the fall. I am still in discussions with Keep Pasco Beautiful to try and identify a project that would be appropriate. So if you know of any projects or any organizations that I should reach out to, Colleen, please feel free to send those my way. And so yeah, please share these events. They're all on our website in the volunteer section. So share these events and come out if you have interest for the time. And then switching gears, a couple weeks ago, we were invited to Keep Pinellas Beautiful's award ceremony. It's their annual luncheon that they have each year to present awards to different volunteers and organizations that partner with them. So we were nominated and we're honored to win the most outstanding environmental partner award from them. Beautiful is an amazing partner. They often win a Bay Mini Grant each year for different community projects in throughout the county. And then they also help me in facilitating all of the Give a Days in Pinellas County. So we really appreciate their support and the award. So if it's okay with the chairman, I propose to have a photo with the policy board and the award. This is the award. I know it's a little unconventional, but it is an herb. It's rue. So if you cook with rue, please take a piece.
Yeah, if we could gather around, take a picture, just to express our appreciation to Keep Pinellas Beautiful for recognizing us as an outstanding environmental program. So I appreciate that.
You want to do that now? Yeah. All right.
I think if everyone stood right here, I'll go on the inside and get a shot this way. Easiest.
Looking forward
Yeah, everybody over here. will be here.
Rue. The only Rue I know is like gumbo. Spelled differently though. Come on in.
Looking good. All right. 1, 2, 3. One more for good minute. 1, 2, 3. That's great.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Ed, on the sanitary lateral, is that moving through? How far has it reached? Has it reached the floor on both sides?
Not sure yet. I'm not sure it's made it out of committee yet. I have to double check where current steps.
But we're pushing, that's one of our directives is to get that. Because in Pasco, we have all these private companies that own water systems. And it's hard to sometimes get them to the table to work on those laterals. And where, you know, I keep watching, last year there was one that didn't make it through. So whatever we can do, we need to be part of that process, because those private providers, and the county has been purchasing those private providers, but we can only purchase them once a year. It's a very big task to get them in-house, and it takes a lot of time. So we just made another purchase of another water company, but there's more we need to get to the table to work on those laterals.
Yeah, there's certainly, it's a priority within the management plan as it stands right now to address ongoing wastewater infrastructure issues. And that relates to private laterals, that relates to moving from septic to sewer where it makes sense. Also looking for opportunities to use more beneficial reclaimed water within the region from existing sources. So all those align with the priorities that we developed last year for us to speak to our legislators about. So any support for those bills that align with Estuary Program's mission, we would
I
encourage.
would love to get the information that St. Pete has done their work on that, because we're struggling. I pushed and we made some applications to DEO on the septic sewer conversions, and we must not have our applications, we don't have the wordsmithing that we need to have done on those. We need to get those stronger so that we can get some more money in to move us off of those septic tanks.
I just pulled it up. The Senate bill is flying through its committee since in its last committee of reference. The House bill has not been heard in its first committee. So
You're kidding me.
there's that.
So the House, which committee is it? Was the first hearing on?
In the House,
Yes, sir.
Environment, Agriculture, and Flooding Subcommittee, and it's got 4 after that. So
We needed at least hearing in one. I wonder who's chair of that committee.
that I don't know. All right, what's next?
We're on agenda item 10 now.
Bipartisan infrastructure law funding item.
Yeah, this also relates to our draft work plan that we provide to the board, usually at our February board meeting. I usually ask for conceptual approval of that draft work plan, which outlines the activities of the program for our upcoming fiscal year, which officially starts October 1 each year. There's a lot of uncertainties in terms of the federal budget as it relates to the appropriations to the National Estuary Programs. There's actually a continuing resolution through Congress that's set to expire tomorrow. There's probably going to be a vote to extend that resolution from what I've been hearing and reading to March 11th, I think is the latest estimate. So there is not a full federal appropriation for the NEPs for this current federal fiscal year, which would define our funding allocations for October 1 of later this year. So with that in mind, what we're presenting is a draft with no potential actions or conceptual improvements at this meeting. We'll come back to you at the May meeting, but The link that is provided in the agenda packet pretty much rounds out our planned activities if the current appropriations to NEPs are maintained at the continuing resolution levels. So you would expect, based on the funding tables we provided in that report on page 58 of the draft work plan, an outline of the funding that we anticipate if those continued resolutions or final budgets adopted, maintaining those Clean Water Act Section 320 funds to the program at about $700,000 level. There are some bills that have been previously proposed that would elevate that to 750, but again, not sure where ultimately Congress will land on appropriations to the National Estuary Programs. So we're just using that as a planning figure. Matching that with the new interlocal agreement tables brings us with an in-kind project to the needed match to see that appropriation. So in total, we're looking at about $1.4 million to support projects in the program. If you go on to page 59 of that draft work plan, it outlines much of our operational costs that we propose in these existing work plan documents that we submit to EPA as a cooperative agreement grant. This pays for all of our operational costs at the tune of now about a little over $900,000. With the $1.4 million budget, we're anticipating being able to fund about $500,000 in additional projects that would support the implementation of the CCMP. We've outlined a couple of the proposed new projects that would be supported through this planned appropriation and support through the interlocal agreement. And most of them are centered on issues that we're facing within Old Tampa Bay in terms of contracted technical projects that we're anticipating, looking at the transition of seagrass to other macroalgae habitats that have happened over the 2016 to 2020 period. Also looking at ways that we can better understand those transition of seagrass resources using remote sensor products like satellite information, as well as other remotely sensed sonar information potentially being developed at the University of South Florida and NOAA. Also looking at expanding implementation of our habitat master plan, supporting freshwater, salt marsh, mangrove, and other restoration needs within the watershed boundary to define an appropriation for those activities, and then just supporting the ongoing monitoring that we've traditionally supported on an annual basis related to benthic and flow monitoring that supports our look at the bay's conditions. On the community outreach and education projects, there's a host of activities that are outlined there. A lot of those are to develop citizen science initiatives that will support our understanding and expand awareness and knowledge within the community on core issues. So we're looking at potentially developing citizen science initiative around our coastal habitat assessment and or a macroalgae survey that we've developed as part of the Piney Point assessment last year, and using citizen scientists to further our understanding on seasonal distribution of macroalgae within the bay. There's also funding to support increasing science literacy and digital storytelling using novel techniques to translate the science through videos and getting that information out to the communities in digestible format. Other initiatives to support our marketing related to, as I mentioned before, our Pipe Up social marketing campaign, now defluoridating an expanded area with recent adoptions of fertilizer ordinances in Hillsborough County. So again, further supporting the partners in the efforts to reduce nutrient loads to Tampa Bay, as well as these other infrastructure issues that we've developed social marketing and other awareness campaigns around. So in total, like I said, there's a variety of projects that we're contemplating at this point, but we're still asking for feedback until we finalize this draft work plan. Our plan would be to come back in May to ask for formal approval of that plan. At that point, that becomes our grant application to EPA that we would provide shared, there's additional information that I'd like to discuss on the bipartisan infrastructure law funding that we'll also potentially receive this year. But I'll stop right there to ask if there's any questions related to the work plan as we've developed it and provided board package.
Questions or comments on the work plan?
I'll just offer that we did ask management board members to look through their budgets and their capital improvement plans to see if they have a project to make that match that we're looking for, the partner match. And we'll put that ask to you all as well. We do rely on your in-kind support for implementing projects that achieve our mission. So we'll be looking for those project ideas from you all.
Seems like you have consensus.
Last thing to mention is, and I talked about this at prior policy board meetings, with the passing of the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're expecting about $915,000 in additional funding coming to our Estuary program each of the next 5 years. So in total, about $4.5 million to bring into the Tampa Bay region to support initiatives and implement the CCMP, as well as to help out with core issues that are outlined in that bipartisan infrastructure law funding project. Maya has been reaching out to many of your jurisdictions and staff on potential ways we could leverage that funding for projects we would like to see move forward. Again, a lot of those are centered in the whole Tampa Bay watershed. At this time, we do not have formal guidance on from EPA of how that money could be spent. One of the strategies we were contemplating because of the lack of tidal circulation in Old Tampa Bay would be to support a causeway alteration that would have benefits for improving flushing in Old Tampa Bay. At this point, we're not sure if we could package the entire 5 years worth of funding to support a great project like that, because we recognize something along those lines is not going to cost $4.5 million. It's going to cost much more of that, much more than that, and we would like to leverage potentially those funds with a big action that would have broad benefits for the Bay. Other strategies that we've also been in discussion about with partners was looking at how we could support Tidal Creek restoration, especially in areas where we know we potentially have nutrient impairments, using our Tidal Creek dashboard and a lot of the monitoring data and information that's collected by all the partners. We can prioritize creeks right now based on those nutrient conditions, but the second layer would be also looking at underserved communities, because that aligns with some of the tenets identified in the bipartisan infrastructure law. So we could potentially look at directing funds and rotate that among the municipal partners, on large projects that have stormwater benefits, habitat restoration benefits in these key Tidal Creek areas. So we're exploring that as sort of a backup strategy for this funding as well. Lastly, the other thing to mention, and there seemed to be some support from this from the discussions we had with partners, was related to these private laterals and other wastewater infrastructure issues that we're dealing with as a community. There could be an idea or concept developed around creating support for incentive programs to fund private lateral inspection, repair, replacement projects. There's been some programs developed now with the city of St. Petersburg and city of Gulfport that can fund up to a certain level some of those replacement projects. This funding could be used to support and kickstart those initiatives region-wide. So that's another possibility of potentially using those funds. And that is, kind of the strategies we've developed internally, but now I would like to turn it over to y'all and see where your guys' preferences might be and where we could further develop potential projects that we would propose and hopefully adopt at the May meeting once we get further EPA guidance of how these funding could be spent. As was explained during the conversation of the CCMP and the geographic boundary expansion, because the amount and type of projects that we're currently managing, a lot of the preference we've heard and a lot of the support we've gotten from y'all as partners and staff was we can't be spread even more thin on like 10 to 20 more projects using this funding. So there was a preference of using the funding towards one large project or rotating among the different partners on a once every 5 years among one priority project. So I think that would be our preference in terms of managing these resources, because the one comment that we did receive from EPA is that this would not be absorbed in our current work plan. We'd be actually managing 2 separate agreements with EPA over the next 5 years for both our work plan and this new funding. So that complicates things from our standpoint, from an administrative perspective. So I mentioned that, and I'll stop there, ask for any comment or input that you might have on priorities that we should be looking at for this funding.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, as I'm learning, in the city of Clearwater, so, you know, I've been following the lateral sewer, private lateral sewer challenges with with St. Pete. And when I brought it up to our Clearwater staff, they, you know, explained to me that people that are in Clearwater, incorporated Clearwater, are already on our city water sewer, and that when we annex in people, almost every council meeting, they're already getting brand new laterals when they're getting annexed in, because we don't allow anybody to have septic, right? They're getting annexed in because they want our water sewer. So we don't, for us to contribute to a lateral program, I think it's a good thing, you know, to incentivize that for other municipalities, and I'd be willing to advocate for that, even though it really doesn't apply to my residents. But one of the things I talked with our new city manager, who's also, you know, on a learning curve along with me, is the Cooper's Point project out there that's supposed to help with flow in the bay. And so if, you know, if I'm going to be pushing for things, I would push, I guess, for us, it might be an easier sell for Clearwater to put money towards that Cooper's Point work rather than contributing to a lateral incentive program. But I don't know. I can't imagine the lateral incentive program is that expensive, you know, that much to put in to match, you know.
Yeah, depending on how long the run of the pipe is, anywhere for an individual home from $5,000 to $15,000 for replacement. So
5,000 to 15,000?
Yeah.
Oh,
So if
that's
I
more than I thought.
If I annex it to Clearwater, I get a brand new lateral?
Well, you have to pay for it.
I have to pay for it.
Yeah, yeah,
You
you get, but they're brand new. You're not like,
They give it to you, you pay for it.
Man, that's a great deal, man.
well, I
It's
mean,
free.
you get it, no, it's not free, but you get, when you annex in, it's a guarantee for us that we don't have residents with rotting laterals.
Sure.
I mean, unless the home's been there.
I just had never heard that. That's great.
Because how are you gonna go from septic into?
Well, it might not be septic, though. It might be on another utility. They might be staying on a Clearwater, but we have a mishmash of 18 different water providers, so.
Well, then I might be, don't quote me for sure.
I'm quoting
but I
this
was-
meeting.
But definitely if they're coming from, you know, from a septic.
Right, no, that I absolutely understand. That makes total sense. Anyone, nobody wants to spend the money, so that means, Ed, you and I will divvy it up at our next one-on-one. Do you have a thought? I mean, we talked about Old Tampa Bay, and that's probably maybe too big a swing for this amount of money. There's always the, you know, geographic balance, but a list of type of projects that we could kind of start visualizing in our head of what that would mean. When we talk about hardening of creeks and reformation there, but what would that mean as far as, the one line that was interesting to me was growing the economy, the environmental justice, access to clean water. What does that mean as far as, because this is, I'm assuming, still infrastructure capital projects. So what's some examples of what that would mean?
Yeah, they're looking for dirt turning projects, not necessarily funding too much of like conceptual planning or management planning. So that's the difficult part right now. Most of those projects that have plans in place and permits in place have the funding for to implement it. So there's There's going to be some time needed to develop the actual plans and permits for some of those projects related to the Tidal Creek restoration that we're contemplating. But that funding would support like direct habitat restoration. Some of the work that we just passed as it relates to the Roosevelt Creek Basin along the St. Pete Clearwater Airport, of looking at removing the tidal weir barrier and also associated habitat restoration with that weir removal. The projects along those lines, particularly if they've been ditched or drained or hydrologically modified, and restoration activities that could be contemplated would support increased habitat availability or reduction in nutrients to the bay proper is the type of project that we would look to fund with that. But again, a lot of those projects right now are conceptual, not fully developed or at the permitting stage.
And I just want to offer that EPA's interpretation of infrastructure, the estuaries are natural infrastructure. And so that broad interpretation is sort of what allows us to talk about habitat restoration projects like we are. And in my conversations with many of your staff, one of the challenges that they expressed was that there's quite a bit of federal funding that's coming in and generating a lot of projects already. And so that's sort of addressing some of these funding needs that Ed has alluded to. But for other tidal creeks that were mentioned, or creek systems, in Manatee County, Mill Creek was mentioned as one that could benefit from upstream water quality improvements. In Hillsborough County, there are some creeks in the Progress Village area that are sort of on the next stage of needing some work, and then Ed's mentioned several others. So we think that would give us some flexibility to have one project to manage, but to also kind of share it around and make that kind of impact that we're looking to.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the work that's already starting in Bartlett Park near Salt Creek. We've just got a grant for improvements along Joe's Creek.
Yep.
That could be probably expanded upon.
Yeah, in St. Pete, we chatted about Salt Creek, Little Bayou Creek down in the Pinellas Point area. And we also talked about an unnamed creek that begins at 34th Street in P-Tech and then drains out to Clam Bayou.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's Joe's Creek through Loma and all that.
So as you go back and talk with your staffs, feel free to communicate your thoughts sooner rather than later to our staff so we can start having some paper on these.
One input I would like to make, as we've been studying these baffle boxes that they're putting in. I know we just had a presentation with the city of Melbourne over on the Indian River Lagoon, and they've installed 18 baffle boxes and I know in Pasco we're studying it too and pushing to figure out how to get the maintenance funding for it. But the baffle boxes are, all of our old roads and neighborhoods were originally designed where they just dump the water right into these canals, and it's building up all this silt, all this road debris, whatever is washing in, some of the stormwater, some of the creeks. These baffle boxes go in there, and the way that they're designed, they clean the water before it hits these canals, before it hits these bays, and they put them in locations that are easy to maintain. And there's a couple of different ways they have to maintain them. They maintain them from a top, they catch some of the bigger, they said they get lots of kids' balls in these stormwater drains and alligators in them and all kinds of things as they're cleaning them. And then there's the dirt that they're trying to filter out before it hits in, and those are cleaned out with the vacuum truck. But those systems that I was watching them present on were incredible tools in the toolbox. And I know in Pasco, like I said, we have a lot of those old neighborhoods that just dump right into our bays. We're just dumping in tire dust. I think that's one of the largest contributors to water quality is tire dust, all the small plastics. But there's different ways depending upon what the nutrient load is and what's happening. They're designing these boxes and they're really improving them. And, I would love to see our county go after that Hot to Restore Act funding that's coming up in April and study, and even, you know, all of us, any other, I know, I believe the city of St. Pete has some of them. St. Pete Beach has some of these baffle boxes. In Oldsmar, as my understanding, has some of these baffle boxes. And it would be really interesting to see how we can stop that degradation of water going into our bay and into our canals and into the Gulf of Mexico. And these baffle boxes on the East Coast, up and down, you just see loadfuls of them. When I went to a event last September, they brought some presentations for it, and I was stunned how much improvement they're able to get those total maximum daily loads down with baffle boxes. So I would just throw that out there too, just as a thought. And I think, like I said, I do think there might be some funding through that Pot 2 money that FDEP is overseeing. And I think it aligns into that program. It'd be nice to see our coast really pick that up and stop that pollution going straight into our water.
Yeah, certainly, like with some of the Tidal Creek or other shoreline restoration activities that we're contemplating, you know, there's habitat components, but there's certainly stormwater improvements that can be integrated, folded into the design. And it's probably going to take a variety of technologies as well as habitat restoration to, you know, get us to the benefits of water quality improvements. So, especially in our suburban, urbanized systems, it's going to need some engineered solutions, some natural solutions. That I think the plans that would develop specific to each of the creeks would outline the strategies, and we could incorporate that a lot for other stormwater, low impact development.
Anything else?
Just so you know, we've done about 40 of those in Tampa.
Wow.
And what we've discovered, and we've done them back in the early 90s, and you cannot put those in low-lying areas because of the outfall, tidal outfall. So it fills up 1 week and then it pushes the dirt out and the garbage out with it. So that's a study we did in the 90s, and now we're back into putting it in areas that are in higher ground or you know, areas that have at least elevation 9, 10. But with partnership with Slope, but we've done quite a few, and they're not cheap. Those are around $70,000 to $150,000 per unit. So, and it does take monthly maintenance.
Correct.
And we have a contractor that does.
A contractor.
Yeah, they back it out every month. So.
Interesting. I saw.
Pretty expensive.
Interesting. They are, but they do, you know, they do deliver, so, you know, that it's, but I know there was a learning curve. They said even there, they learning how to position them on a piece of property so that they're easy to maintain. And they said they're going back and doing retrofits on some of the older boxes and trying to figure out ways to
we've
continue.
looked at that too, because you ended up, the ones that are closer to the bay, you have to put a valve, and if you put a valve, then you're causing a flooding problem upstream. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues with putting it in low-lying areas. So we've learned from that. But Slope is a great partner when it comes to
excellent. Very good.
All right. We have one more information discussion item related to State of the Bay. Thank you again for that reminder. We are missing one staff member today. I have 7 staff in total, and the reason why Marcus Beck isn't here is because he just had his first baby delivered this morning. Let me see if I can bring this up. So there's Marcus with his baby. That's a big baby. Are you giving me that?
Oh my gosh.
I didn't catch the time, did anyone catch the time?
7:30, Jack Larson.
Cute.
Jack Larson.
Jack.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
And was he gonna be at the meeting or?
Thank you. So I'd like to start by saying thank you to everyone on your staff who contributes to these monitoring projects. And not just the ones I'm going to talk about today, to everything that goes into our annual and triannual and biannual assessments of the bay. And that's a huge part of what Rob Brown did over his career, was providing information for us and the Manatee County and the Estuary programs that are around here, helping us help everybody else improve the bay. And today we're going to talk about a couple of different projects, monitoring information from 2021, looking at our water quality assessments, our seagrass transects, and then the annual habitat restoration report that we do. And then I'm going to talk real quick about how we're actually putting this into a living document so we can present it on the web real time. But progressive. There we go. So this is our annual water quality report card. It's been produced since the early 2000s. It's built on that structure of monthly water quality sampling by multiple partners. The constituents that we look at within this report card are chlorophyll A, light penetration, and it also brings in the water management district's biannual seagrass projects. This is available as a PDF, and it's one of those marvelous products that the Marcus Tech has turned into an online platform for us. As you're all very aware, we've discussed already today, over the past couple of years, 2018 to 2020, we lost about 6,500 acres of seagrasses within Tampa Bay. About 4,500 of that was lost from Old Tampa Bay. And that's going to be a recurring theme that I'll talk about on a couple of different slides here. But again, looking at that focus of what's happening with the seagrasses in Old Tampa Bay is very important to us as a collective organization. This is the annual stop-light graphics that we provide as part of the water quality report card. On the far left, these management concerns. There have been chlorophyll and water clarity problems in Old Tampa Bay. This far left column is the Old Tampa Bay system. Water clarity, chlorophyll issues in that system that have been recurring over the past 5+ years. A lot of that is due to pyridinium. We believe it's impacted by the issues that we have with circulation in the system. And then moving to the center graph, for the last 3 years, it has not achieved the chlorophyll regulatory criteria. And this has implications for the nitrogen management consortium and potential activities that they may need to undertake. And then the map on the right, you can see up in Old Tampa Bay in the northwest low area, that's where we are seeing a lot of these problems. It's behind the Candy Bridge, it's behind Howard Franklin. There are these areas where we are seeing high chlorophylls, especially in the summertime. And that's what we talked about for the annual work plan. In some of our projects, we have an actionable science grant. We're working with the Florida Wildlife Research Institute up right now to identify some of the monitoring management activities that need to go into projects to improve this system. We also do annual transect monitoring. 9 different agencies around the Bay contribute to this effort. We do a summertime quality assurance training. And the monitoring itself occurs in August to October, pretty much when the seagrasses are at their maximum. We focus on what the species are in the system and also coverage. So we have to drop basically down these 1 by 1 meter squares and say how much seagrass is in there, what type of species are in there. And over the past couple of years, largely built on on the skills that Sheila has brought to us, we're starting to do some more macroalgae assessment in these to try to add another tool to the toolbox and provide the information to you all. The next couple of slides are going to follow this format. On the left is a map of all of the seagrass transects that we have in the system. It'll be this little red circle on the one that this graph talks about. And this is another interactive website that Marcus created for us, I believe last year. And you can select the transects, the types of species that you want to look at, the year range. This transect monitoring started in 1998 with the city of Tampa. And so we have some data going back that far. The bottom graph, pretty much ignore for this talk, but that's called frequency occurrence. It's basically the percentage of time over the years that seagrass has shown up in each of these in the transects of interest at the time. The top graph with the circles on it, on the left side of that, that's the year going up the side, so from 1998 to 2021. The bottom is the transect distance. On the left side, that's the zero, basically usually going to be land, and then you just progress out from there. This is one of the Fort Manatee transects. It's right by Piney Point. It was been about 350 meters long historically, and using this, because Piney Point is one of our big concerns right now. On the seagrass side, we didn't see really any immediate change in the system. It's stayed fairly stable for the last couple of assessments for seagrasses, although we're fairly certain that the Piney Point releases had spring tide implications and other water quality impacts. They weren't a locally significant component for seagrass implications at this time. However, we're still waiting to see what happens with the water management district's annual flights. They just did their latest round in December and January for Tampa Bay and the other watersheds around here, and hopefully sometime later this year we'll get some new numbers on all of that. Feather Sound, again, going to Old Tampa Bay. This is actually one of the longest transects we have in the system. And what I'm showing here is from 1998 to about 2014, and then the next slide I'll show as from 2010 to 2021. I just wanted to point out that for about the first 12 years of the monitoring program, that these from 1998 to about 2009, 2010, there were fairly stable seagrasses in this system. But then over the past from 2010 to 2015 or so, we saw a fairly large expansion over on the right, where all those additional circles are. And so that fairly well parallels when we saw increases, the large increases in the seagrass beds over the system, over the entire watershed. I would like to point out also that the fuchsia circles in here are Caulerpa, one of our attached algae species. Everything else on the graph is seagrasses, and you can see them. You can see the Caulerpa occasionally popping up in this graph. But this, so the next graph I'm going to show is from 2010. This the line right here, here onto the present day. So you can see there's an extreme change in from our seagrasses, which are generally more robust. They're actually a plant versus the attached algae, which is Caulerpa. That's what, and this is why we're asking within the annual work plan to do some exploration of this change. What this shift? Why is this shift occurring, and what does it mean? We have a sense that it's not the greatest habitat. The Caulerpa is not the greatest habitat. That it's not providing the same ecosystem benefits, but we need to determine that to a finer degree, and then try to understand what kind of management activities we have to do that. And one other thing that I'll say about this from 2021, this was done again. This transect was surveyed in the September timeframe, and between then and December, all this Caulerpa apparently is gone because Chris Anastasia from the Water Management District was out there doing some of their on the ground QA for the aerial analysis, and went back to this location and didn't see any of these Caulerpa. So again, it's very transitional relative to the seagrasses, and we're trying to find out what's happening with the system. Then on an annual basis, we are required to report to EPA on what's called the Government Performance Results Act, and that's where all of your staff and multiple partners from around the watershed send in information on their habitat restoration projects and also their management projects. So we're asking for information on control berms that are up at the top left. That's actually Fish and Wildlife Service on McDill Air Force Base. And in exotics removal or preparation for these works, or even living shoreline projects or moisture restoration, such as this is Fantasy Island down the line. And this feeds into, we're using this on our level for the inform the Habitat Master Plan, try to understand how we're meeting those goals and targets. And this information we gathered includes types of restoration and management activities, what kind of habitats are impacted, the location, the size, whether that's the area, the acreage, or length for living shorelines, and also cost and partners that are involved in the project. So for fiscal year 2021, we received information on about 70 different projects throughout the watershed. Over 800 acres were restored. A lot of this was one project in Lower Green Swamp. We had nearly 30,000 acres of enhancement. Again, that's prescribed berms or exotics treatment. So thank you to all of your staff for providing the input for this project. Very helpful. And similar, we're talking in-house right now about trying to improve the presentation of this. Like it was fairly dry, kind of boring. But so we're talking about trying to do something more similar to the water quality dashboard. Trying to give you something that's much more shareable, much more visually appearing, using either the stoplight graphics, trying to track those Habitat Master Plan targets. Because you'll recall over 2020, we had targets for low salinity salt marshes, living shorelines, freshwater wetlands, all multiple different habitats within the system. We established 10-year targets and 30-year goals. We use the SWIP flood and the land use land cover and seagrass data as part of this. And again, we're just going to be using this to try to identify the successes that we can celebrate, but also the needs where we're falling short during these projects. A couple of just going to highlight a few of them. Tampa Bay Watch, one of our amazing non-NGOs in the area, is doing some work up at Whiskey Stump near the Frank Schultz Preserve, the moisture restoration project. They build it at their compound near Fort DeSoto and then take them out by boats. So these oyster domes will have some lovely oysters on them in the next couple of years. Copeland Park in the city of Tampa. This was actually one of our restore projects. So starting the exotics removal, some of the earthwork was conducted this year. We've been helping do a lot of training of this project. A lot of coping grass was removed, and then they did some revegetation. And now there's a lovely bunch of waterfowl and wading birds that utilize this on a regular basis. And then I think Maya mentioned it at one point, but I always like to try to remind myself that we actually have watershed and lake. And so we have this freshwater wetland project that was reported by the city of Lakeland, Seven Wetlands. It's a restored phosphate mine. They did some contouring of one of the pits and had some volunteers out there over the last couple of years. It's coming along very nicely as well. So it's a lovely open park as well. If anybody would like to visit that, highly recommend. The last thing I'm going to talk about today is that the living document we have Marcus and Joe have been working on our state of the day component of the website. So we have those our standard three pillars: the clean waters and sediments, thriving habitat and wildlife, and then that informed engaged community. And each of these has its own tab, and each of these have subtabs that are live. And so, for instance, we have under habitats and wildlife, we have information on the fisheries assessments that are going on, primarily like FWI over the past several years. But this information is live on the website. What's very nice about this is that whenever it's updated through the Shiny applications or some of the background work on some of that data gets automatically updated into these systems. Then I'll go ahead and highlight a couple of things on the informed engaged community, which shows us our behavior change activities, what kind of grants we're giving, for the mini grants. It talks about the social media reach and some of the volunteer information that we're doing. So this is available. You have to share the website with you, but we're pleased we're able to push this out as a living document that's going to stay on the website. We'll also be presenting a print version of it at the next board meeting.
So just to kind of hammer something home, this is a draft version. It's live on the website, but we're still actively tinkering with it. To Dr. Hogarth's question before, this is our attempt at making science accessible to really distill down where we've made great progress and where we have challenges. And so we definitely encourage you to visit the tbep.org website, take a look at this and be brutally honest. We want to know that, if you guys don't understand it, please let us know and we can help work to these figures so that they are accessible to elected officials, to resource managers, and the general public. So please, we really do want your feedback on whether or not this makes sense and is useful.
Yes, we definitely recognize that there are pieces that are missing here, but it's still building. It'll probably continue to be built over the next.
But we know we're a bunch of eggs.
That's critically important. I mean, obviously, most folks that are using this, get to this level, have a deeper interest in the subject matter. But I say to our staff all the time, if we can't explain to Mrs. Smith, that's not Mrs. Smith's fault, that's our fault.
Right.
So just to wrap everything up on the State Bay 2021, we're still seeing those problems that are in Tampa Bay. We're very interested in what's happening between seagrasses and attached algae. But on the success side, we've got the reporting of 800 acres of restoration, 30,000 acres of enhancement in the region. The information talked about is available online. We'd like to share this and sharing more in the next meeting. So, plan to take any additional questions. Really appreciate it.
Great presentation. Are there questions? Thank you, sir.
Just to elaborate on what Maya said, we recognize this is in draft form, building it out towards key indicators and making it more intentional in terms of our communication of where the problems exist, as well as where we've had successes, and celebrating our successes is what we want to communicate through this document. And the document will be a living document, not something that is stale in 3 years. It'll be updated constantly as data feeds into some of these back-end processes to synthesize information and present it in a graphical way. So that's my hope and sort of vision that staff is now implementing, and I really applaud them for putting this together through this digital form, and we're going to constantly improve it through time with your input. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we've concluded our action items, our reports, our discussion items. The information items you see are on the links, right?
Yeah.
Everything else to present?
Nothing else to present, just to call out on page 21 in the packets that there's information on all the program areas that we're currently involved, the 5 active EPA work plans, as well as external grants and the grant programs that we administer through the Bay Mini Grant Program and the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. So if you have an interest to dive into the metrics or any of that information presented in the quarterly reports or what was presented at the TEC or CAC meetings, please feel to reach out to us. But there's a wealth of information in there if you want to dig into it.
Our next meeting is May 27th. We'll be back at the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. Is there anything else for the good of the order? All right, thank you for being here. We are adjourned.